I'm Don Zoldi, your co-host with Mike Peel. So great to see you all out there.
Somebody listening to us in the background
right there. So anyway, I don't know if everybody heard that, but Don Zoldi here. We are with the full crew, and we are so excited to have you all with us today for our very first live stream. And we have incredible guests today. So I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Mike Peel, who's going to go ahead and tee this day up.
Yeah, so our guests almost need no introduction. We're going to have them talk about themselves a little bit. We're going to start with top over here, over there, Romeo Durscher, Senior Vice President now of Auterion.
Well, you know, it's a holiday here, and I feel like I'm in holiday mood. It's a wonderful morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks you for having me on the show. Don, Mike, Miriam, it seems like we just saw each other a few weeks ago.
We did, that's why.
Such a small world, right? Drone world, anyway, where we're all from. So another dronerati, we got Miriam McNabb, co-founder of Drone Life and Other Properties, right?
Yes, and so I am editor of dronelife.com, commercial drone news. I get to write about people like Romeo and take articles from people like Don and Mike. So excited to be here to kick off this new effort. It's really fun to have the opportunity to talk sort of beyond our really narrow industries and talk about kind of how drones are stretching out into the bigger tech landscape. So really excited to be here. Thank you again.
Yeah, and
absolutely. Yeah, Mike, I was going to say, it's not just drones, right? We are talking about all kinds of technologies on this podcast. And it's probably a great segue to kick off with our first article from Miriam about robots.
Yeah, so this was a fun one. Miriam, do you want to give us a little bit of a rundown?
Sure. So we each got to choose an article to talk about, and this one really struck me. From baristas to inspectors, Singapore's robot workforce plugs labor gaps. And I really had a question about this because they talked about two different things in the article. They talked about using Boston Dynamics Spot to do industrial inspections. Now, as Romeo mentioned, we all got to be together at a show. We've seen the Spot robot, four-legged robot in action.
There were a lot
really
this year.
Impressive. It's incredible. You know, the ability to do these sort of dark, dirty, dangerous jobs. It's got four legs, which allows it to travel over rough terrain. Really impressive. It's got a lot of utility. Yes, it looks like a dog and it's actually pretty cute, but it has a ton of utility. Now, the other thing they were talking about is putting robotic baristas in public train stations. And that one I kind of had to question because I was thinking, okay, I can totally see the point of putting robotics like Spot into industrial places. Yes, you have labor gaps, you have workforce issues. We have that here in the United States also. But at what point, why don't you just have a coffee vending machine, right? Like we don't have as much in the US, but whenever I travel to Europe and the Netherlands, you know, they have these great coffee machines where you can choose anything. You can choose a latte or an Americano or a milk coffee, they call it. I love that. But, you know, they have these machines where you can just put your credit card in and get yourself a coffee. Why do we need a robot to do that? And so it's kind of interesting. What exactly are we using these robots for? Are we using them to just produce a coffee in an automated way? Or are we using them for something different? And then Romeo came up with a great point about this. Romeo, talk about what you saw in the airport. There it is. That is just
freak of nature.
In this video, if you look in the article, there's a video, and in the video it shows this robot that's in the library and it scans books, and then suddenly you see a side shot of that robot and it has glasses on and eyes painted on it to humanize this robot, and that reminded me of San Jose Airport, heart of Silicon Valley, 2016. This robot here was in the airport. It had a little pad where it was stationed, and to get it started, you had to do something. Now, this robot had an artificial face of a young girl, and on the below where the chest and belly area is, there's a big screen, and it says on it, or it said on it, to get started, press my belly.
That's
And I
almost
thought that
creepy.
was so
Like I have to
creepy.
say,
Not almost. That is
almost
creepy. Should have
Yeah.
been some product testing there. it's like,
Yeah, so-
tickle me
so-
Elmo.
Why we have the need to humanize these robots, and I agree with you, Miriam. The latte machine. Okay, there is really no need for this multi-armed robot to come into place. On a cruise ship recently, I saw a cocktail making robot, and that I kind of thought was really cool, because here you have these different ingredients, these different bottles that come from different shelves, and so it's kind of cool to watch this. But what's really cool is because every single drink, so my favorite off-duty drink is a White Russian or a White
Well,
Ukrainian.
you heard
I
it
guess.
here, Romeo.
Right, white Ukrainian. Now
Next-
that's
Next conference, you know what to buy them.
Exactly. Every single one tasted exactly the same because it's done standardized. So now that is something good or something bad, because usually the human bartender puts his or her own flavors into those drinks. Now you replace that individual with a robot, you have a very, very standardized experience. So that can be good or bad.
Well, and when you think about bartenders, almost classic, right? This idea of people like interacting with bartenders. I mean, heck, they did a whole movie about this back in the day.
right.
Tom
I'm
Cruise,
old
right?
Tom
Cocktails.
Cruise.
Woo! Yeah, I'm thinking that too. Like, I'd rather have Tom Cruise, shaking up my cocktail any day. But to the point about kind of humanizing these robots, like I'm sure there is a point to that, right? And Mike, I think you have a little, yeah, there you go, a link. So there's a company called Digital Dream Labs, and they're making this little tiny robot called the Vector. And you can see its eyes right there, the two little green glowing ones. But what you don't see, and there are videos on their website, so I'd commend for you to kind of go and check it out. It blinks, right? It has it's not just the image of the face, press my belly, or like a painted on glasses, like in the other one that we had just heard about in the library there in Singapore. This one actually emotes. So this one actually has artificial intelligence on board. Now, right now, it's not being used for functionalities like Miriam mentioned, whether it's construction, like Spot, or baristas, or even library scanning. This is purely social robotics. This concept is you now have a little buddy that when you come home, if you don't have a dog or a cat because you work too many hours, because some of us do, you have your little robot that greets you at the door. And this little guy will talk to you. He will learn from you, like what all about you, and that is your little buddy. So I don't know. What do y'all think about this one?
Well, like I said before, I'm not sure if I think that's genius or the saddest thing that I've ever heard. And I'm not sure, because I do think that, sometimes I think that the level of automation and electronics and smartphones and computation that we have in our lives has maybe reached a high point, and we need to just get out into the park and talk to our friends, but I don't know. I can see a point of sort of personifying things, like for children, to make it less intimidating, welcome to the library, things like that. If you to make things less intimidating. But I don't know about social robotics. I'm not sure. And I also feel like if you can execute a complex operation like mixing a cocktail, I mean, come on, how many ingredients does a Long Island iced tea have? A lot. I don't know. Then that probably has other applications which may be higher up on the needs scale than creating the perfect Long Island iced tea. Like you might be able to be working in a factory creating medicines or something like that. Producing medicines rather. But yeah, I don't know about the aspect of social robotics. I'm not sure what the use cases are. I mean,
Well,
other than companionship.
I could think of one maybe. So imagine a scenario in a remote environment where, say, maybe somebody's trapped. And maybe this is a great segue to Romeo's article, which involves wildlife and the use of a drone in a particular scenario. We'll get to that in a second. But imagine a scenario where it's a human that is trapped somewhere, maybe in the woods, maybe even on the water or something. Let's say woods, be easier, because I don't think this thing floats yet or is waterproof. But, you know, so the drone maybe can talk to you, right? Maybe it drops the little robot down and it can like engage with you and keep you calm. Like I could see where maybe a human can't reach that place, and then you have something nearby that can maybe give you instructions or keep you calm and talk to you, and actually has a little face that will blink, and like it'll make it feel a little more real than just a voice coming from a machine. That I don't know. There could be serious uses for that in like public safety or even military applications. I could think of on the battlefield. Why, Miriam? Why send in a real dog if you could send in, you know, a drone dog? But guess what? None of those dogs we're talking about have heads. I mean, right? They all have these like weird, like freaky looking. So like, let's make it look like a dog. Let's give it eyes to drink and like, right? So everybody loves a dog, and they have comfort dogs for a reason.
Yeah, but so to interject on, there's I think the barrier that we really need to discuss is when to humanize and why to humanize, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny because Miriam's example of the barista versus the bartender, when Romeo described it, it had that cool kind of novel effect to it. How long that lasts is one thing. You could probably ride that out as a brand for a little bit of time. But do people default back to wanting to interact with a human for that type of interaction or not? A perfect example would be like a movie theater. I don't need this 16-year-old kid who's chewing gum and texting on their phone. I'd rather just go up to the terminal, get my ticket, and go in. I'm always reminded of my second trip to San Francisco, because this is such a San Francisco image. Lamborghini, or no, some type of supercar pulls up to this huge line of people waiting outside a coffee robot, you know, the automated barista that we're kind of talking about here. But it was just a big kind of vending machine when it came down to it. But you could see the automation in process. People are lined up for it. Guy steps over a homeless person to get into that line. And you have to wonder, is that person homeless because there's no longer a Starbucks because now there's this machine, right? Is there a need to replace people in that situation? And I think that was kind of what Miriam was hinting at. Like, maybe we don't need to automate everything out, especially when having that human kind of in the loop adds warmth to it, right? And so what you're saying here, though, and the question is, how human does this thing actually feel in person? Like, there is some benefit to humanizing these things for situations where basically you don't have access to a person, or maybe your family passed away and a little robot companion is easier to take care of than a puppy, right? I think we'll be finding out these lines as we go, and there's no way to kind of stop the trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Miriam.
Well, I also think like you have to, I mean, we've all seen the economy go up and down and up and down. And so right now where I live, there are fast food restaurants, Dunkin' Donuts, whatever, that are having to limit their hours because they can't find the help.
Where did they go?
I got
like,
that.
This is where I want to know. Like,
yeah, what are people doing these days?
Yeah,
I don't understand it at all.
But so right now this month, would those companies prefer to hire robotic or to build robotic solutions and limit their employees? Yes, but would that be good 5 years from now? The economic climate might be different. We might not have 3% unemployment here in the US, and we might have a need for more of those jobs. And if you replace every job on a production line with a robot, you often find yourself in trouble in 10 years, right?
Well,
Earlier.
it depends. You know, sometimes people just get into different jobs. Like I started as a social media manager, and I remember talking with the Android devs at AndevCon, one of our shows, and uh, I got laughed at because, but you know, like a friendly laugh. That's a job that didn't exist before. See, we didn't code the jobs out of existence. Would be the constant like clarion call of people in tech. At some point, though, I think we're always going to have the anxiety that, you know, the jobs will go away. But if we could get rid of the dull and dirty jobs and just leave the human, you know, the ones that matter for human interaction, I think we're fine. I think as we approach that precipice, though, where the human gets better at averaging, or the algorithm gets better at averaging what the wanted human response is, then these service jobs also become a question. And I think that's a much bigger concern, actually, than the robots themselves.
Well, Mike, I was going to say, it's not just the dull and dirty, right? It's the difficult, dangerous, and sometimes it's safer, actually, to use a robot. I think that's a great segue into Romeo's piece, because in this piece, we talk a little bit about wildlife and safety of this particular animal. So, Romeo, over to you on this one.
Yeah, so, you know, I love to showcase these UAV for good use cases. And here is one that I pick not only because it's a heartwarming story, so it starts off as a heartwarming story. It's this orca killer whale that made its way up the Seine River in France. And as we know, these are ocean animals, and now they are in a very different environment. They're in sweet water, in river water, and that's not healthy for those animals. So now they were trying to guide this orca back out to sea. And that's not an easy task. The animal is already in distress. And so what do you do? Somebody had the great idea, hey, let's use a drone with the speaker to play sounds, kind of like, you know, the Star Trek movies where they were using technology and sounds for whales to lure it out to sea. And I really loved this concept because it also kind of sent me back in time, also to 2016, when I was pushing so hard that we put a speaker on a Mavic drone. And I got a lot of pushback at the time from the engineering team because nobody could understand why a speaker would be helpful. And once we finally convinced everyone in R&D, and once we finally had these speakers available, the market reacted the very same way. And I remember the day the Mavic 2 Enterprise was released with a speaker, a lot of people were commenting on DJI has lost its way. They are not creative anymore. A speaker, nothing can be done with a speaker. And that to me was extremely not challenging, but fascinating, because we had reached a point in time where we started to add sensors, not just camera to drones, sensors either that send something out or pick other sensors. And that was a big change, in my opinion. Now, in this particular story, unfortunately, the drone with the speaker did not achieve its purpose. Unfortunately, the orca was already too distressed, and a couple days later, it was decided that they had to, in essence, deal with the orca in a different way and euthanize it. So it was a sad story at the end, but again, it showed that we can utilize existing technologies in ways that we didn't intend. And that to me is the fascinating piece, that we're starting to add these different types of sensors to platforms, and things have to become plug and play for it to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Romeo, you're exactly right. It depends on the use case, right? We always talk about public perception, and as you said, this is it wound up being sad in the end, but the whale didn't die because it was stressed out from orca noises coming from a drone that were trying to guide it home. It died because it got what they call, I think, black fungus, which they believe, and they'll learn more from an autopsy, occurred before it even made its way into that river, and likely caused it to be disoriented and be so sick already before it wandered, into deep into Paris, or into France on that river. But Miriam, maybe you comment on this, because we saw early in COVID people using, like, law enforcement as an example. We talk about public perception. Law enforcement using drones to yell at people to get, using speakers to go home, like, get back in your houses, go away. You're supposed to be quarantined. So that didn't go over so well, did it?
Well, no. And I have to say that that particular example always infuriated me. And Romeo will know, because I wrote an article saying sort of no good deed goes unpunished, because those drones were donated to a law enforcement agency who decided on their own what to use them for. And actually, if you think about this, maybe their messaging was a little bit off, but we were in a pandemic. We were trying to keep our distance. So having a drone fly overhead instead of having officers go up to people, it actually made a lot of sense. But what infuriated me about that one was the politician who said drones are yelling at people. I'm like, okay, we're not in a sci-fi movie. The drone doesn't do anything, okay? The drone is operated by somebody else who decided what to do with it, okay? This is, come on, you're watching too much TV here. But I have seen, because, I get so many stories across my desk, and the wildlife arena in Africa, I have seen drones used with speakers specifically to keep elephants, I think it was, out of crops, out of fields. And this is a very challenging thing when people are growing subsistence crops, when they rely on those crops to survive. It's very difficult to say, hey, don't shoot or harm the animal that is coming through and crushing your entire harvest, right? So they're trying to balance sort of protecting the wildlife with protecting people's livelihoods. And what they found is that drones emitting the sound of a swarm of bees will keep the animals away. The animals don't want to go. Yes, exactly, right? So this is,
maybe that's what the cops should have used with rather than saying get off the street.
Yes, and there are other examples. So, for example, Brink drones. I love what they're doing. They have a drone that they use in emergency situations. They have communications on that drone. So the ability to communicate with someone, and in this case, we're talking about a sort of law enforcement engagement, but the ability to communicate has been proven over and over again to reduce harm to all parties. If you can communicate with someone, you have immediately increased your chances of a successful outcome that is an outcome with no harm to any party. So this is really important. I think there are so many good uses, and it's a little bit in the drone industry, because the drone industry is developing so fast. When we were first in the drone industry, people would say, you guys are a solution looking for a problem. But now it's more like, if you build it, they'll come, because once you put a loudspeaker on it, a million people think of great reasons to use that, and ways in which, the ability to communicate something from a distance can be really useful.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Romeo.
Yeah, and this is so fascinating, because I lived through those donations for COVID and all the backlash and all the positive that we learned from it. And the whole purpose was that we also learn what works and what doesn't work. But one thing that always stuck with me was, if we look at law enforcement, so we have the megaphones where people hold it up and they, say something and people hear it. Then we have the speaker systems on police cars. If highway patrol wants you to pull over, they have the ability to very loudly announce themselves. And we have speakers on helicopters. So the concept of speakers on mobile vehicles is nothing new. Yet on a drone, it was like the world was coming to an end.
The
Yeah.
drones are screaming at people.
So-
I know, really. No
And
sense. Makes no
Mary,
sense.
back to your point with kind of law enforcement. I mean, when I did a piece, Iris Automation is working with the city of Reno and part of that Beyond program for swift water rescue operations using drones. And just the time savings and so many benefits to doing something like that. But that water is loud. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're in that water and you have a drone overhead, that's going to give you some comfort that, okay, somebody might be watching me, assuming you have some wits about you. But that drone probably will have to scream to really, for that individual to hear. And in that circumstance, like, that's probably okay, right? Because if it's, we see you, like, please be calm, help is on the way, even if other people hear that, like, I think that, and as you said, this idea of communicating with people greatly increases the likelihood of a positive outcome, and especially in a swift water, rescue scenario, from what I understand, not only the coldness of the water, just the stress people get under, they panic. The biggest reason people drown, I learned, is they panic when they don't think anyone will save them. And so seeing something, hearing something, knowing help is on the way, I think right there might flip a switch in someone's brain and make them at least, kind of like, okay,
Yes.
I'm not going to
Tell me what to do.
tell me
want somebody to tell me what to do.
Right. And by the way, and I know, I think you both know her, Jackie Jumovic, right, from Hover UAV in Australia, doing incredible things, has been for a while. First, they had the shark cam that she kind of, let's just call it, invented or developed, right, where they're spotting sharks. But over time, they used the drone, the lifeguards were using the drone to go out and drop life preservers to people because they could get the drone out much quicker than they could row out there on the water. And I believe there is an audio portion of that where it drops the thing and says, we're coming, grab onto this life preserver. And so again, another incredible example where not just animals, but humans across the board, like this audio function on a drone can be so significant.
Yeah, with any new technology, and as it's being deployed to more and more use cases as people become inventive, there's going to be a portion of people who are just always apprehensive, right? Or they're just Luddites when it comes down to it. I think, though, for technologists, the middle ground, the people that had you either communicated with them ahead of time the right way, positioned what you were doing in the right way, sometimes marketing is the solution, you could win that person over. And in some cases, you don't have to, right? So the lifeguard situation, like, immediately our brain understands how useful that was. If we go back to the police trying to use it for crowd control during COVID, people are already anxious, right? Some people are already afraid that this is a lockdown that will never end. And yeah, what images do they start conjuring up? They start conjuring up those dystopian movies, right? Almost all of them start with like a virus that, turns everybody into zombies, right? So you're working backwards from there already when you try to engage with them on that. So, I bet had that police department taken a different route with communication or slowly eased into determining whether or not that was actually a use case for the moment, they might have done better. But I always kind of think back to something that Vic Moss said to me on one of the Interdrone podcasts, which was, if you have to understand, like, legally, a drone is no different than a camera on a really tall stick. So even though the perception is different, that's the actual implementation that's happening. So we got
Romeo made such a good point about it's the same as on a helicopter or except you can't get a helicopter out there that fast.
Right. Proximity, though. I mean, that's one difference, right? So you're above the person's head, but you're closer. So
I would love to take this moment to maybe transition to that case, because we're talking about are drones qualitatively different than a helicopter, than a camera on a helicopter, or a camera on a crewed aircraft, or even on a stick? So for those that have been following this case, one of the first ones involving the Fourth Amendment out there in the state of Michigan, Lakewood Township versus Maxon, there was a new development in the past week that may be significant, maybe not. Bottom line is that the fat lady hasn't sung on this. But the significance of the case revolves around the fact that it is one of the first ones grappling with the Fourth Amendment privacy in the context of a drone. And just super quick, by the way, Jonathan Ruprecht, if you follow him on his website, his blog, Ruprecht Law, he's got a pretty good summary, and he actually posts up the whole appellate decision. The Supreme Court of Michigan recently issued an order. And so let me just tell you where we are now and real quick where we were, and then I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts because I know everybody has thoughts. Okay, so where we are now is the case bubbled up to the Michigan Supreme Court, who's now kicked it back down to the appellate court to address one single issue, which is whether or not the Fourth Amendment exclusionary rule applies in non-criminal cases. Why do you care? Because the Lakewood Township is not law enforcement. What they did was they hired a private pilot to use his drone to fly in a way where it was not visible to the public other than from an aerial view, to basically take imagery over a period of time persistently of these people, the Maxon's backyard. Essentially at a junkyard back there. There's a long history of strife between the Maxons and this township, and that evidence was used against them in a kind of a zoning-like hearing, administrative, non-criminal hearing, and they were going to fine the Maxons significantly. So property interest, not life or liberty, when you're thinking about due process. And the appellate court said, no, they should have got a warrant. Okay, they could have got a warrant. They didn't get a warrant. We're going to go ahead and strike this down. It got appealed. Like I said, the Supreme Court has now kicked it back down, said, okay, assuming they violated the Fourth Amendment requirement for the warrant, does the exclusionary rule, which is basically a remedy for violating the Fourth Amendment, does it even apply here? So it's a really technical, nuanced issue, but let's talk about this whole idea of, does the Fourth Amendment apply? Like this whole idea of privacy from a drone versus from a stick, a camera on a stick, versus from a helicopter, because the Supreme Court of the United States has never ruled on a drone case specifically, but they have ruled on helicopter criminal cases and aircraft criminal cases where law enforcement has snapped pictures, used it against people that ultimately went to jail. So let's see. Miriam, looks like you're chomping the bit. Let's go with you first. She's chomping. She's like, I want to talk about it.
Oh, it is. I have to say, this is something I have strong feelings about. So, for what it's worth, only my opinion. Okay, I am. I probably shouldn't even be this specific, but I really feel strongly about this because of the volume of emails that I get sent to me that say, at least sort of 10 to 20 a week that say, what can I do about my neighbor who has a drone? Or I think this person's spying on me, or I think this person's bothering my dog, or I think this person. And I really take issue with any municipality that wants to make a law about drones. And my issue is, there is a law that says you can't annoy your neighbor's dog. There is a law that says you can't spy through your neighbor's window, right? There are peeping Tom regulations or whatever. So that's the law. And whether you do that with binoculars or a cell phone or a camera on a stick or a drone or whatever is going to be invented next week, the law is the same. You can't harass an individual in that way, right? So I think when it comes down to this, for one thing, I do find it interesting that as soon as there's a drone involved, so there's really no argument that the Maxons are guilty of what the township said that they're guilty of. They do have a junkyard in their backyard. They totally, paid no heed whatsoever to the town regulations. They did that. Nobody denies it, but they're trying to get by on a technicality because there was a drone involved. And so my feeling is, if the law covers, helicopters and whatever, it should also cover drones, and there really should be no exceptions specific to the vehicle. Right? So I think as soon as you sort of say, well, it's a special case because it was a drone, not a helicopter. It was a special case because it was a drone, not a camera on a stick. It was a special case because it was a drone, not a pair of binoculars. No, there's no special case, because in that case, you have to keep updating it every single week as a new technology evolves. And we all know that it evolves constantly. So you have to say, no. The issue is, can you do surveillance of somebody's property without a warrant? Go with that. The drone should have nothing whatsoever to do with it, in my humble opinion.
No, it's good. Romeo, go ahead. You're thinking about this.
Yeah, well, I've always felt the same way, that we cannot make laws based on technology differences. There's absolutely no reason to go down that route. It's fascinating to me, because I think, had we not called this device a drone, which already had history in people, so let's say that this device was called a tosh, a word that I just made up. It's a tosh. Now, if somebody flies a tosh with a camera, I don't think people would have such an issue with it. But because it's a drone, and they immediately think of spying, military destruction, bombs, high-resolution images that are seen in the middle of the night, and they can see through walls because of Hollywood, it's an issue. But had it been a tosh, because nobody knew what a tosh with a camera was, it would be a non-issue. I'm convinced we're at this point.
Interesting. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, so when it comes to like the Fourth Amendment stuff, I don't think that actually applies here, right, Dawn? And in the case, was it the search was warranted, right?
No, it does apply, because, so just kind of real quick, Civics 101, U.S. Constitution. The first question you have to ask is, was there government action, like, for the Fourth Amendment to apply? And in this case, because it was a township, the Constitution applies. And there is a requirement to get, not only in criminal cases, but administratively, a warrant. There is such a thing as an administrative
So did they get the warrant, though?
And I think, to Miriam's point, I think there was a law in Michigan at the time that kind of addressed this idea of, you need a warrant, right, to do this. And there was an opportunity, like, the township could have, as Miriam said, there's no question these people were guilty. Like, everybody knew it. They could probably smell it from miles away. Like, God knows what they had in their yard. So the ability for them to get a warrant was almost a no-brainer. They simply chose not to do it. And so the warrant issue absolutely applied. The Constitution applied here, Mike.
Yeah, so just also thinking about it, like, what's the difference between readily accessible satellite imagery, like Google Earth, versus the drone in this situation? So that's like where this kind of becomes a little gray.
I want to take that, because so Jason Chris from Class G posted up something about the Fourth Amendment yesterday, and we were kind of like back and forth, and some guy said exactly that, Mike. He said, I don't get the difference between this and the satellite imagery. And the difference between this and satellite imagery is that I'm hoping that NRO, that or the private companies that are throwing up all these like low altitude or LEO satellites, right, low Earth orbit satellites, they're not specifically targeting people. In other words, Google Earth might take a large, wide area image for mapping purposes, and there might be humans in there, and your house might be in there, maybe even your car. Theoretically, they're blurring those license plates. You can't see like the person's face or personally identifiable information. It's kind of qualitatively different when you are very specifically targeting someone. Now, can they do that from a satellite? Absolutely. Does that change the picture of whether a warrant is required or not? I would say it does. Because
right.
It's one thing
that's what I was thinking.
View and scoop in stuff. That's called incidental collection. And to specifically target somebody with the intent of using that evidence or information against them to either, take away their liberty interests, like put them in jail, or their property interests by taking their money.
So
that's what the Constitution.
So in this specific instance, there are your choices to be that invasive are camera on a stick and drone, and the cops chose camera on a stick.
No, or they could use a helicopter.
No, they chose drone. Oh yeah, helicopter too. Yeah,
they could use a
sorry,
helicopter,
but
right? And
that's very expensive. So
and I think this is what Miriam's point is. Those Supreme Court cases involving helicopters, basically the Supreme Court has said, good to go. Like, you can use that marijuana evidence, one was a greenhouse that they took pictures of. The other one, I think, was just growing in the backyard or something. And they said, yeah, it's good to go. And it was kind of a public, it was more like a, what was it called? I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top. Something like a public field. It was like a definite exception to the warrant requirement that applied in those cases. But I want to get back to Romeo's point about not having specific laws for specific technologies, because
very important point.
There are a lot of laws popping up, Romeo, not just in the United States and Europe. Artificial intelligence, like people are right. I think EU just came out with a draft, if not draft, an actual AI law. And specifically as it applies, I think, to gathering information for job applicants. You apply, they run these algorithms, collect all kinds of data. It's a little different than the visual stuff, but nevertheless, like, specific laws are cropping up to address specific advanced technologies.
But I think that's AI. AI is not just software. So to me, AI doesn't fall under just the software umbrella. This is a very, very specific piece of software that does something very, very specific with data. So I think this is very appropriate. It's the whole thing is so fascinating. Also the privacy. People that are saying, and I had this very recently here in Europe, a discussion. I overheard a discussion of an individual who was flying a drone over a river, and a person that approached the pilot, and I was maybe 30 feet away observing and listening. And it was so fascinating because the person was really upset because she felt her privacy was invaded by this drone. And the drone operator was trying to convey to her that, you're out in public. And she could not understand that her expectation of privacy out in public is very different than in her house. And she would always argue back with, but this same drone can come and look into my kitchen window. So combining the two.
Yeah,
so
that makes no sense. But here's my question, Romeo. I'm out in public having a conversation with somebody, but can someone 30 feet away hear me? Right? So in other words, I think that's a little different. If a drone with advanced sensors on it can very specifically target a person and listen to what they're saying, I think that's a little different than just that expectation of I'm out in public talking to my friend. I'm not thinking that someone 30, whatever you said, 30 feet, I'm sorry, away can hear what I'm saying and maybe even record it 30 feet away.
That's probably settled with directional microphones, though, right? There has to be some case law in the book on that.
People are out, like, seriously, I'd be wearing a tinfoil hat if I was out in the park, talking to my friend, thinking, oh, I can't have this conversation in public because someone might have a multi-directional microphone and record me right now. I mean, seriously, nobody thinks that's going to happen. And I think it's a little, I don't know, these issues are hard. These are hard, and we could talk all day long about them. But Mike, I think there's some folks in the chat you wanted to shout out to real quick.
Yeah, so I'm going to go from top to bottom from what's happened so far. So Chris Wedgeworth talking about our little robot friends earlier, should be easy to potty train.
Absolutely.
Concur.
Yeah.
Nicole Ramsey, I love Vector. I'm showing my youngest. It's a neat platform that makes robotics more humanistic. Arian Denny, great panel. Thanks for the thoughtful discussions. It will be interesting to watch the drone industry adapt and grow. And we got Chris again with Now I Want a Tosh.
Well, Well, Romeo, when you said Tosh, my head went to that show that used to be on TV,
Tosh.0.
Daniel Tosh. It was really rude. Tosh 2.0 or whatever. I'm not sure I want a Tosh if it's going to be like that. But,
What I was thinking of was, unfortunately, it was a fail, right? Those of us who've been tracking the industry, the Lily. Remember that, the Lily drone?
Oh yeah, the Lily drone.
And it had the eye. It really had a cute face, and it was called the Lily. It was
I want one. I've seen the little love bug. Cars
unfortunately,
with
it became
eyelashes.
infamous
Some of
for
which are
being a
pink, and I'm like,
Kickstarter fail, but
Right.
I'm like, that
They
was
eventually
not-
did come out, right? Like
I
they
think so,
failed.
in
Yeah.
some form,
But-
but it was really quite adorable, and it had an adorable name.
Well,
But
this
hey,
actually
there's something
was-
else that happened this week, and I'm kind of throwing here a curveball in it. But
Yes.
4 days ago, Exxon announced that they're doing their Taser drone,
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
and
Great headline.
yes, it was a great headline. Now, okay, so I have to go back in time again. Before we were the first company that approached, or the first drone company that approached at the time Exxon to work together on a project. And my idea was more on the data side. And even at that time, 5 years ago, or 4.5 years ago, the talk came up. Well, we could potentially put a taser on a drone, but it got quickly swept under the rug. And today, this comes back up. And
So why does Exxon need a Taser, Romeo?
well, okay, so the
School
thinking
shooting.
behind it is if you
Excellent.
have a school shooting and you can quickly get a drone in it, you have an additional tool. Now, that's a complete, in my opinion, you're trying to find a solution, or a use case for something that is really not needed. But what really triggered me is this is an ethical line we have not yet discussed, not only in the drone industry, but the greater community and the public. And that is weaponizing small mobile robotics. And you remember a few years ago in Dallas, where an explosive was used on a robot to neutralize a threat who was shooting at people from a parking structure. And that
It's
really,
Texas, right?
really started this discussion. What are we doing with these mobile robotics, and how are we weaponizing them? And on one side, you can say, well, this is non-lethal. This is a taser. This is actually something that doesn't kill. But my opinion here is it's a very fine line to go from non-lethal to accepting lethal on a small mobile robotic.
Well, and not only that, Romeo, but some non-lethal, let's just call them effectors, to use Robert Mente's word from Northrop Grumman. Rubber bullets freaking hurt. They can
And they're
literally
dangerous,
take an
and they
eye
could
out.
blind people. Yeah.
Okay, so I can I please? I have to. No, well, so the something came out today where the ethics committee resigned. Did you see that, Romeo?
Mhm.
So much
the
of
ethics committee
Axon's
of the
ethics
company?
board, yes, resigned in protest.
Whoa.
Yes.
That's
So that
Interesting.
yeah. So I wanted to bring that up.
Full crew, everybody.
I have really mixed feelings about this though, because
Yeah.
because this is happening as a result of one of the, it is a great tragedy in the U.S.
Yes.
and that it happens so often is such
Yeah.
a terrible tragedy. And yeah, I think we all have very, very intense feelings about this, about the school shooting. But in this particular case, I have to say that if I were one of those parents
Yep.
and who was outside telling the police, please go in, please go in, please go in, and they couldn't
wouldn't.
or they didn't, I would have taken a drone with a taser. I would have begged them to send it in.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just being real here. So I know that that's, and I'm in general not in favor of weaponizing anything, but I have to say, and the alternative, if you bring, your only alternative in that situation is they are going to try to eliminate the shooter.
Or they're sending it, to your point, Miriam, they're sending a human in, right? We talked in the very beginning, as we started this conversation, with dull, dirty, dangerous jobs, right? So if there's a human in the loop, I think, Romeo, I think it's qualitatively a different discussion if it's a fully autonomous drone, and I'm talking no human in the loop, like killer robots. But if there's a cop flying it, who would have otherwise physically had to go in and do that activity, maybe. But to your point, Romeo, I agree 100%. This is something that needs to be discussed, not only from an ethical standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint. So when you think about the military, right, you think about the strikes that occur downrange. Without getting into graphic detail, like, right, that will, I told you I'd have to kill you, right, with my background. But there's a process. Like that's like not
right.
like the Wild West, right? So first of all, the law of war applies. Second of all, there's a whole bunch of approval authorities up the chain that you have to go through to get not only approval of the target, but probably of the actual strike before it occurs, right? I mean, I'm not revealing state secrets here because there's been movies about this and they're very accurate. So there's a process, and like having that process, having some rigor to it, I think is important. And these issues that you're raising, Romeo, are key because the reason why I'm a process person is because in the heat of the moment, you don't want to you want to revert back to your training and your process. And as long as that training and process are vetted and legit, and can save lives and are done carefully. Now, are there going to be probably problems that happen? Sure. You're going to tase the wrong guy who has a heart condition, and that person's going to die. But that taser maybe would have happened, that might have happened anyway if a cop walked in there and tased him in person.
Well, that also might be a concession we make as a society, that statistically less people are going to be harmed if we deploy this effector versus another, right? And to your point, Don, the procedure in putting procedures, and to Romeo's point, those procedures will come out of conversation, and it's important to have these conversations, is to have some reliable expectations for how certain circumstances will go down when the police have to be called with such a device and utilize such a device. And then even understanding, though, that sometimes procedures, planning, and training still will fail, right? As we saw in Uvalde, those officers were trained. And, you might not be able to give a certain commander the right tool to make the right decision if they're not able to handle that situation, because human after all, right? So important discussions will have to be had, and important procedures will have to be put in place if we're going to accept this, because otherwise there'll be a public backlash that will actually disallow us from using these tools in the situations where they would be most necessary to deploy.
And to both of your points, I mean, many states actually in the United States have on the books prohibitions in law of weaponizing drones, period. So, that is one law that maybe Romeo would agree with on technology. So we got a couple minutes left, Mike, and I know Miriam really wants to get to this one. This one about the economy and Tesla and announcements. Here we go. Mike, this is your article, so why don't you tee this up, and we'll take a couple minutes before we power down for today.
So, it's hard not to grab an Elon Musk headline because they get so many eyeballs on them. But I thought this one was important for once because it said he wanted to cut 10% of Tesla jobs. And it's actually not the only headline like this. A lot of the tech sector is kind of crawling back, cutting staff. And I mean, this has a lot to do with the economy, right? You can't get free money from the Fed anymore. 0% rates are over. And we've been so used to almost an insane growth-minded tech sector. I think this is a continental shift in the way that we're going to be thinking about tech companies in the next 3 to 5 years, actually. And then, of course, Musk being the troll that he is.
And I love the sunglasses and hat.
Yeah. Thank you, Insider, for finding the perfect perfect picture to go along with the tone of this article. So, what's everybody, before we go into Musk being the ultimate troll? Anybody's thoughts on the tech sector and what we've seen? Maybe drone industry insights. Or is there capital being deployed still, or is it going to be the age of austerity?
So I'm going to say that I call BS on Elon Musk's statement, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I don't think that I think what was it, exuberance or something like that. There was at some point when Alan Greenspan said we're in a period of unreasonable exuberance or something similar to that. But we're not in that period. I do think that there's still good investment. There's still steady investment in startups, but they're not sort of random. People aren't just chucking $1 million here and there just to see
So intelligent
what happens.
investments.
They're being a little more intelligent about it. Elon Musk, however, here we have a global gas crisis caused by the war in Ukraine, and he makes electric vehicles, and thinks he has a problem. Like, really? When you think about the CEO, the difference between the lowest paid employee and the highest paid employee at Tesla, it's ridiculous. And I actually spoke to a young gentleman in the drone industry who had an incredibly innovative product. He fortunately was rewarded. He developed his own drone company, got bought out, did extremely well. But while he worked for Tesla on alternative energy sources, he actually had to live in a van in the Tesla parking lot because he was so low paid, and this was somebody who was truly brilliant and contributing to the technology. So I kind of call BS on him. I think he's just going to trim everything down to the bone, no matter what, because that's how he envisions.
Well, and
running
it's
the
so. I
company.
want Romeo's comments too, but I just wanted to tag on to what you said about the van, Miriam, because in this same original article Mike posted, Elon also threw down that, like, well, if you're going to continue commuting from home, just stay home. Like,
Yeah.
it's, y'all
You
need
could pretend to
come into
work
the
somewhere
office.
else. Were
And
his
it's
exact
so
words.
funny because I think globally, right, everybody had to go home, and there's pluses and minuses. You have a whole show on that alone. But I think there's great efficiencies in some instances, right, to be able to work from home. And it's spurred a whole another cottage industry, I think, in a way that didn't exist before COVID. So it's funny to be like, no, like old school, y'all need to be in the office around the water cooler. So go ahead, Romeo. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
No, it's fascinating. Look, I'm not a huge fan of Elon Musk. I think he has done some amazing stuff. Look at SpaceX, fantastic. But him as an individual, I'm not a huge fan. And in this particular case, it's really, it's like the Amazon 2015 that promised this drone that comes and does Amazon deliveries, and 7 years later we still don't have it. At the time, it was the best PR that the drone industry ever gotten, and that to me is kind of Alan. He loves to do these kind of controversial things that get everybody talking, good or bad, but then there's very little substance behind it. But what it does to me, it shows a company culture that I think is not healthy. And having few friends that either are still working or have worked on his companies, you just have to be okay with it. And if you're okay with it, that this is the environment, then you can have a most amazing career. But if you're not, then you are going to be suffering, even if it comes to fruition or not, just because of the environment. If somebody says, hey, you know what, you cannot work at home anymore, you got to be in here, no matter if you have to drive 7 hours because you're relocated during COVID, I don't care, or then leave, that just sets a bad tone and company culture. And me personally, I would hate it.
Well, I will tell you what, we are at 1 minute to go here, and Romeo, by the way, everybody, this was not scripted. You just teed up perfectly our Full Tilt podcast, which will air tomorrow for the first time, because it's all about leadership, and leaders drive culture, and culture creates companies and organizations that either thrive or fail. And so thank you for that, because at the end of the day, That's what is so important. In addition to the news and the hottest topics, leadership. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow with General Poss, leading in highly complex technical environments. And next week, by the way, also on the crew, you'll see the panel here in a second. We're going to have Jeremiah Karpowitz from Diversified Communications. I'm sure most of you know Jeremiah. Also another media maven like Miriam. And then we have Savannah Haran, the senior robotics engineer at the Phoenix Group. She was our number 2, literally our second podcast of the year on Dawn of Drones, and is still ranked number 2 in popularity. So join us on the crew next week with that. And then on next Tuesday, we're going to have a full crew Twitter Spaces with Ramon Roche from the Drone Code Foundation and Ed Bucas from Robotics. And you haven't heard about Robotics, look them up. They're doing this thing called drone orchestration. It's a thing, and it's cool. So join us next week. And I just wanted to say thank you, Miriam and Romeo. This was so fun and awesome because of you. So we really appreciate you being our very first guest ever on the crew.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this was fun, and it was like a nice little, come together again after, 5 weeks ago when we all saw each other in Florida.
Absolutely. So thanks, and we'll be in touch soon. Also, join us on the Dawn of Drones on Wednesday. We're continuing our Emerging Leaders Month, and it's going to be great. We'll have Arium Analytics with their Robird. Yeah, check it out. See you then.
All right, out here, everybody.